Every year come NFL draft time, one of the fun things to do is take a look back at previous year's drafts, see how things turned out, see how things took place. You know, you have the benefit of history being your guide and being able to tell you, this worked out really well. What the hell were they thinking? They were stupid. They were genius and dot, 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 dot. Every year when it comes to the NFL draft, you're going to get guys that are bust, and you also know that you're going to get guys that are steals. In another video coming up very soon, I will talk about some of the biggest draft bust in NFL history. But in this video, I'm going to talk about what are, in my opinion, the top 10 NFL draft steals of all time. Now, a couple of qualifiers that I want to put on this. Number one, for it to be classified as a draft steal, to me, for the sake of this video anyways, the player had to be drafted at some point in time. So no undrafted players. They also had to be drafted by the team that they spent the majority of their career with. Like, they're known for being a player of that team. So let's say somebody like a Drew Brees, who was originally drafted 32nd overall in the second round in 2001, is known not as a San Diego Charger, the team that drafted him, but as a New Orleans Saints. So I don't really classify him as an all-time draft steal for the sake of this discussion here. And also keep in mind with this list, I kept it two guys that were either in the Hall of Fame or in one notable case will be in the Hall of Fame. It'll just be a matter of time. So let's get going here. My top 10 NFL draft steals of all time, and you are more than welcome to chime into the discussion and debate. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know what your list of the top 10 NFL draft steals of all time would be down in the comments section down below. Number 10 would be a Bear. Richard Dent, an 8th-round selection, 203rd overall in the 1983 draft out of Tennessee State. This was a guy that was a part of that great 83 Bears draft class that saw 7 starters from that class on that 1985 Super Bowl championship Bears team. But again, this was an undersized defensive lineman out of a small school in Tennessee State. The Bears took him in the 8th round, which would be 203rd overall equivalent today would be a late 6th round pick. And he ended up eventually going on to gain induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Just think about that for a second. Number 9, Leroy Kelly for the Cleveland Browns, who was an 8th round pick, 110th overall in the 1964 NFL draft out of Morgan State. A guy, again, that went to a smaller school. The Browns were looking for that long-term eventual replacement for Jim Brown, and they found that replacement for Jim Brown to a degree. How do you replace one Hall of Fame running back with another Hall of Fame running back? And to be able to get a Hall of Fame running back in the 4th round, in terms of an equivalent today, the 110th overall selection would be in the 4th round. In 1964, it was the 8th round, and Leroy Kelly was simply genius for that Cleveland Browns organization, and clearly it panned out very well for them. A very skilled back, a great between the tackles runner who could also gain some big yardage on the outside and also had great skills as a returner and a receiver. One of those really forgotten backs in terms of NFL Hall of Famers that people forget just how well-rounded his skill set was as an NFL running back. Number 8, Mike Webster out of Wisconsin. The Pittsburgh Steelers took him in the 5th round. 125th overall in the 1974 NFL draft. Of course, that 1974 NFL draft is widely remembered by those in the know as being perhaps the single greatest draft by a team in the history of the National Football League. The Pittsburgh Steelers in 1974 selected 4, and I count them again, 1, 2, 3, 4 Hall of Famers in one draft. The only team to ever do that. Draft 4 Hall of Famers for their team in one draft. They took Lynn Swann in round 1. Just think about this for a second. Jack Lambert in round 2. John Stallworth in round 4. And their last Hall of Famer was arguably their best Hall of Famer out of the 4, and that's Mike Webster, who is maybe still to this day thought of as, if not the greatest center, one of the 2 or 3 greatest centers in the history of the National Football League. And they got him, what would equate today in the 5th round of 1974 would be the late 4th round here in 2014, out of Wisconsin, Hall of Famer, one of the all-time greats at his position. Number 7, a 17th round selection out of Alabama, 200th overall in the 1956 NFL draft. Everybody will talk about Tom Brady and where he was drafted. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But people forget just how big of a draft steal a Bart Starr was for the Green Bay Packers. Now keep in mind, they had drafted another Hall of Famer in the second round of this draft, and that was Forrest Gregg, the tackle out of Southern Methodist. But here, almost 180 picks later, in the 17th round, the 200th overall selection, the Green Bay Packers get their leader, their flagship franchise player, their quarterback for the next 14, 15 years in the 17th round. He was a part of that great 56 Green Bay Packers draft class that featured, like I said, Hall of Famer Forrest Gregg, multiple-time Pro Bowlers like Bob Skoronski, and then obviously here Bart Starr. He quarterbacked the Packers to 5 world championships during the decade of the 60s. Just think about that. 17th round, 200th overall selection. Number 6, Shannon Sharpe, the tight end slash tweener out of Savannah State. They took him in the 7th round, the Denver Broncos did, 192nd overall in the 1990 NFL draft. Now, here was a guy coming out of a small school. People maybe knew him being Sterling Sharpe's brother, a guy who had been a first-round pick a couple years earlier to the Green Bay Packers. But they didn't really truly know a whole lot about Shannon Sharpe, and they weren't really sure based off of his size and his skill set whether he was a wide receiver or whether he was a tight end or really he was really going to fit anywhere. All Shannon Sharpe did was help yet again redefine the tight end position. And by the time his career was all said and done, he had won 3 Super Bowl championships. And he was, when he retired, the all-time leader in receptions, receiving yardage, and receiving touchdowns for tight ends. Not bad for a 7th round pick, 192nd overall out of little tiny Savannah State in 1990, huh? Number 5, Roger Staubach, the 1963 Heisman Trophy winner out of Navy, taken in the 10th round, 129th overall in the 1964 NFL draft. The significance about this was, yes, Roger Staubach was a legend as a college player, and he was the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. But he also had a 4-year military commitment during the Vietnam era that he had to fulfill since he went to the Naval Academy. So Tex Schramm, Tom Landry took a chance on this kid in the 10th round, said, you know what, he might be gone for 4 years, but when he comes back, he'll be ours. And all he did was go on to become the, you could argue, the quarterback of the 70s. Even though Bradshaw won 4 rings, when people think about a quarterback in the 1970s, they do think about the quarterback of America's team, so to speak, Roger Staubach, Roger the Dodger, if you will. He led his Cowboys to multiple Super Bowl appearances, 2 Super Bowl titles. And when you really think about it, a 10th round pick, which today's NFL would be a 4th round pick at 129th overall. They waited 4 years for him to come, and all they got was over a decade of greatness and excellence. And they got what you would obviously count as the all-time Cowboys quarterback. Even though Troy Aikman was their quarterback in the 90s, and even though he technically went undefeated in Super Bowls, he won more Super Bowls than Roger Staubach. Roger Staubach will always be the player of players in the history of the Dallas Cowboys, and most importantly of all, the quarterback of all quarterbacks when it comes to Dallas Cowboy quarterbacks. No question about it. Number 4, a 20th round selection, out of Southern Methodist University, 232nd overall, which would still equate today to being a 7th round pick out of the 1954 NFL draft. That was Raymond Berry, taken by the Baltimore Colts. Part of the reason he was drafted in the 20th round back in 1954 is that you figure at that time football was not very much of a passing game, and he didn't catch a lot of balls in high school or in college at Southern Methodist. But when he got his opportunity, by God, he made the most of it. By the time he retired, he was the career leader in receptions. And Raymond Berry, the word has it over the years that in his entire career, he only dropped 2 passes. Will always be known as one of the best route runners in NFL history. Will always be known as one of the best sure-handed possession type of receivers in NFL history, a part of 2 championship teams during his time with the Colts, being along with John Mackey, the really go-to reliable weapons for Johnny Unitas in that Colts offense of the 50s and early 60s. Raymond Berry, a 20th round selection, who obviously went on to gain induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame and was a first ballot one at that in 1973. Number 3, When you think about quarterbacks of eras or decades or generations, or quarterbacks or players that define their positions and become kind of that gold standard, that measuring stick that everybody else is measured against, you think about this guy here, Joe Montana, a third-round selection by the San Francisco 49ers, 82nd overall in the 1979 NFL Draft, out of Notre Dame, a third-round selection. There were people back when Joe Montana was playing Notre Dame, even his old college coach never really seemed to have faith in him. Sometimes he went with him, sometimes he didn't. It seemed like he put another quarterback in to screw it up, and then he'd expect Joe Cool to come in and save the day, and that's what he often did. You go back to his last college game in the Cotton Bowl against Houston, and you see an example of that. But Joe Cool, what he didn't have in size, what he didn't have in tremendous arm strength, he had in moxie, he had in intelligence, he had in field vision, he had in accuracy, he had in understanding of the game of football. He was a very good mobile athlete as well, and was a perfect fit for that West Coast offense that Bill Walsh wanted to run as head coach of San Francisco. All Joe Cool went on to do was become the quarterback of the 80s, become the quarterback maybe of quarterbacks of all time, be a four-time Super Bowl champion, and really become the measuring stick that all future quarterbacks are measured against when it comes to the NFL. Number two, you go to another small school, and you go to a historically black school in this case, a player that started off at South Carolina State but had to leave because he was a part of civil rights protests in the late 50s, early 60s, went to a junior college, then went to what was called at the time, I believe, Mississippi Vocational School, and it became Mississippi Valley State, that you may know for where Jerry Rice played, and he was drafted out of by the 49ers 16th overall in 1985. I'm, of course, referring to maybe the other greatest player in the history of Mississippi Valley State, and that is Deacon Jones, who was a 14th round selection, 186th overall in the 1961 NFL Draft. He became a part of that fearsome foursome along with Merlin Olsen and Rosie Greer and Lamar Lundy, that great front four that the LA Rams had in the 1960s under head coach George Allen. Deacon Jones really in a lot of ways is still the measuring stick of pass rushers, still the measuring stick of defensive ends to this day. And to be able to get this guy in the 14th round, 186th overall, which would be equivalent again to the 6th round today, such a dominant player for so long, such a great player for so long. He coined the term quarterback sack. He changed the importance of the pass rush from the defensive end position. Deacon Jones, one of the all-time greats, no question about it. 14th round, just think about that. But to me, the number one draft steal of all time has to be Tom Brady, the 6th round pick out of Michigan, 199th overall selection in the 2000 NFL Draft. Now think about it. This is a guy that was taken after such great legends like Chris Redman and Spurgeon Wynn and Giovanni Carmazzi. Think about that for a second. All of those guys, and I'm forgetting a couple others too, so because they're so insignificant. I think T. Martin as well. These were all quarterbacks that were drafted ahead of Tom Brady. Now this is a Tom Brady that during his last season at Michigan was basically playing second fiddle for whatever reason to Drew Henson. It was one of those examples of Drew Henson was a more highly touted prospect, and as a result, he had the bigger skill set, he had the bigger size, he had the bigger arm, he had the bigger sex appeal, and here's little skinny Tom Brady, and everybody just kind of overlooks him. He's good, he's solid, he's reliable, he's productive, but he didn't have that sex appeal and he didn't have that wow factor, which is part of the reason that he dropped to the 6th round to the New England Patriots in 2000. And we all know the story of Tom Brady by now. Bledsoe gets injured in week 2 of the 2001 season. Tom Brady steps in and ultimately leads the Patriots to the Super Bowl in that 2001 season. They upset the greatest show on turf, St. Louis Rams, and one of the greatest upsets in the history of the Super Bowl. And Brady goes on to win a total of 3 Super Bowls, make a total of 5 Super Bowl appearances. And with all the talk of Peyton Manning and all of that being great, you can make an argument, obviously, for him being the quarterback of the 2000s, right in there. You know, whereas Peyton Manning was the 1st overall selection in 1998. Here's Tom Brady, the 199th overall selection in the 2000 NFL Draft. He was so highly thought of at Michigan by his head coach that he wasn't even the primary starter. He took a backseat to Drew Henson. And now Tom Brady will go on to be remembered as one of the great quarterbacks in the history of the NFL, won 3 world championships, played in 2 other world championship games, became one of the true cornerstone linchpin players in the history of his organization, in the history of the NFL, and like I said, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Again, I hope you enjoyed my list of the top 10 NFL draft steals in my opinion of all time. You can let me know what you think of my list. You can let me know what your greatest draft steals of all time are in the comments section down below. Next up, I'll be talking about the 10 biggest draft busts in NFL history. Oh, baby!